My hands didn't shake as I read their disownment letter at the 5-star restaurant. My sister's phone recorded my expected breakdown. My parents watched with satisfied eyes. Then I reached for my own envelope. They wanted my breakdown. They planned for it. They choreographed it. And they waited for it with the kind of smug, sickening pleasure you only see in bad movies. But this wasn't a movie. This was the crescendo of my entire life. 28 years of being the dutiful, yet constantly rejected daughter. The letter was short, brutal, and entirely predictable, listing my supposed failures. My choice of career, my non-traditional lifestyle, my refusal to marry the man they picked, as reasons for permanently severing all ties, both familial and financial. My mother, with her face radiating a look of cruel vindication, leaned forward, expecting the tears, the pleading, the catastrophic emotional collapse she had worked so hard to achieve. My father just sat there, stern and silent, his approval for this monstrous act evident in the slight upward curl of his lips. And my sister, Chloe, the golden child, had her phone angled perfectly, recording the whole scene for what I can only assume was future family entertainment. They thought this was the end of my story, a tragedy starring their broken daughter. But they were wrong. This wasn't the end, it was the start of the final act, and I had a much better script. Was I wrong to turn their most manipulative, vicious attack into the greatest humiliation of their lives? Tell me honestly, would you have done the same thing? To truly understand that moment, that perfect, agonizing silence in the private dining room of La Fleur, you have to understand the decades of quiet psychological warfare that led up to it. My parents, Robert and Eleanor Sterling, are the very definition of old money, a family where reputation is everything and emotional connection is a weakness. They built an empire, not out of passion or innovation, but out of cold, calculated mergers and acquisitions. And they expected their children to be assets, not people. My sister, Chloe, was the perfect heir. She naturally gravitated toward the business world, was engaged to a man from a similarly wealthy and respectable family, and followed every directive my parents issued without question. She was their pride, their reflection, and the one who would carry the Sterling name into the next generation of boring, predictable wealth. I, on the other hand, was a constant disappointment. My crime, I loved art. I went to a state university on a scholarship instead of an Ivy League school they could donate to. I became a successful, independent architectural artist, creating large-scale installations that were critically acclaimed but didn't involve sitting in a boardroom. To my parents, my art was a hobby, a phase, a frivolous waste of a good brain. They spent years trying to break me, using subtle digs, cutting remarks, and the constant, crushing comparison to Chloe as their weapons of choice. Every family gathering was a gauntlet. Every conversation was an interrogation. They controlled every aspect of my life they could touch, from my childhood allowance to the car I drove, always under the guise of caring and maintaining our image. The financial leverage was the last and most effective tool in their arsenal. They promised me a substantial inheritance, a trust fund that would be released on my 30th birthday, contingent, of course, on me being in good standing with the family. They used that money, that phantom promise of security, to manipulate my life choices for a decade, always threatening to cut me off if I strayed too far from their desired path. The pressure intensified a year ago when I turned down the marriage proposal of their chosen fiancé, a man who treated me more like property than a person, and decided to move halfway across the country for a major commission. That was the last straw for them. I had finally, truly stepped out of their control, and they saw only one way to pull me back: financial ruin and public humiliation. The dinner had been set up under the pretense of a family reconciliation. My mother had sent an uncharacteristically warm, almost loving, email suggesting we meet to discuss the future. I knew it was a trap. My gut screamed it, But part of me, the old hopeful part that always craved their real, unconditional love, wanted to believe it. I arrived at the restaurant, dressed impeccably, my nerves taut but my resolve solid. The atmosphere was immediately cold. No warm greetings, just icy nods. We ordered, and the small talk was stilted, painful, and revolved entirely around Chloe's upcoming, lavish wedding. Then, just as the waiter cleared the appetizers, my mother reached into her designer handbag and produced a heavy, cream-colored envelope. She placed it right in the center of the table, sliding it towards me like a weapon. The air instantly thickened. She didn't even look at me when she spoke, her voice flat and formal. "We've thought long and hard about this, Amelia. Your choices have left us with no alternative. It's time for you to face the consequences of your rebellion." That's when Chloe pulled out her phone. I watched her perfectly manicured finger tap the screen, saw the little red recording light come on, and in that moment, the last shred of my old self, the one who tried to please them, died. It was replaced by a calm, cold certainty. They weren't just disowning me, they were performing the act for posterity, hoping to crush my spirit and then replay it for their friends as a testament to their parental strength. My father cleared his throat, a sound that always signaled a solemn, important pronouncement. "Open it, Amelia. Read it. We want you to understand the gravity of your decisions." I picked up the envelope. The paper was thick, embossed with the Sterling family crest. The irony was palpable. The letter, typed and signed by both of them, was a declaration of my complete and total financial and emotional severance from the Sterling family. It explicitly detailed the cancellation of the trust fund and removed me from all future consideration for any family assets, citing willful neglect of familial duty as the cause. They had been thorough. They thought they had left me with absolutely nothing. As I finished reading, I met my mother's gaze. Her eyes were triumphant. Chloe's camera was steady. They waited for the scream, the tears, the begging for a second chance. But they got silence. I folded the letter neatly and placed it back in the envelope. The only sound was the faint clinking of cutlery from the main dining room. I took a slow sip of water, a subtle, deliberate movement that felt like a punch to their perfect script. That's when I smiled, not a defeated, broken smile, but a calm, genuine, and utterly terrifying smile. It was the smile of a woman who had already won. I knew exactly what they wanted, and I was not going to give it to them. The letter meant nothing to me anymore because, while they were busy playing their sick little power games, I had been building a life completely independent of them, a life they knew nothing about. I had already made the decision months ago that I didn't want their tainted money. I wanted my freedom. That realization had given me peace, and that peace was my ultimate weapon. They looked confused, their perfect performance thrown off course by my lack of reaction. My mother's satisfied expression faltered. My father's stern facade cracked just a bit. This was the moment of the switch, the turning of the tables that I had rehearsed in my mind countless times. So that's the situation I was in. They played their final, cruel card, and I was supposed to fold. I was supposed to shatter in front of them and the world via Chloe's phone. I had every right to be angry, devastated, and to simply walk out. But I knew that walking away quietly would be exactly what they expected and exactly what they would spin to their social circle. That I was a child who ran from accountability. I had to make a choice. Absorb the humiliation or use their own vanity against them. Before I tell you what happened next, what I did that changed everything, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have let them win the emotional battle, or would you have fought back with a move that guaranteed your freedom and their lasting shame? Their confusion was my cue. I reached into my own purse, a modest, unbranded leather bag they had often ridiculed. I pulled out my own envelope. It wasn't cream and embossed. It was a simple, manila business envelope, thin and unremarkable. I placed it on the table between us, pushing it gently towards them. My mother raised a skeptical eyebrow. "What is this, Amelia, a counter? Demand, it's too late for that." My father crossed his arms, regaining his posture of judgment. "Whatever you have there is irrelevant. The decision is final." "Oh, I know the decision is final, Mother," I said, my voice soft but carrying absolute conviction. "I'm not trying to negotiate. This is not a counter demand. This is simply my final, official response to your little production." Chloe, sensing new drama, subtly adjusted her phone's angle. "You're still recording, aren't you, Chloe?" I asked, looking directly into the camera lens. Her eyes widened, surprised that I had acknowledged her role, but she didn't lower the phone. "Good, you'll want to get this part." I looked back at my parents, my eyes meeting theirs without wavering. "You see, for the past year, while you've been using that phantom trust fund to control me, I've been making my own arrangements. You always told me that the only way to succeed in business was to find leverage. Well, I found mine." I gestured towards the manila envelope. "Go ahead, open it." My father, always the one who couldn't resist a challenge to his authority, grabbed the envelope. He ripped it open and pulled out a stack of documents, photocopies, and official letters. As he started skimming the first document, his face went from dismissive judgment to utter disbelief, the color draining from his face until he looked like a statue carved from chalk. My mother, impatient, snatched the paper from him. She read the heading and the signature line, and a small, strangled gasp escaped her throat. She looked at me, a wild, panicked look replacing her smug satisfaction. Chloe, sensing something had gone terribly wrong with their script, leaned closer, still recording. What they were reading was a package of documents confirming several things they never thought possible. The first document was a certified letter from the Board of Directors of Sterling Acquisitions, Inc., their own company. It stated that, in light of his impending forced retirement due to a long-standing pattern of unethical and borderline illegal business practices I had painstakingly documented over the past year, the board had voted to dissolve my father's controlling stake and transition the company to a new majority owner. The second document was a deed of sale. It showed that my father had secretly, 3 years prior, leveraged the family's primary estate, the beautiful, historic manor they valued more than their own children, as collateral for a risky private investment that had recently collapsed, putting the entire property into foreclosure. They had been completely focused on my trust fund, a tiny fraction of their wealth, that they never imagined I would find the real financial skeleton in their closet. The final and most devastating document was a formal business agreement, signed and notarized, showing the new majority owner of Sterling Acquisitions, Inc. That new owner was my personal holding company, Amelia Sterling Architectural Arts, LLC. It was all legal, all above board, and all executed over the past 6 months, using funds I had painstakingly earned from my successful art commissions, supplemented by an angel investor who had been deeply impressed by my work and was looking to clean up a tired old name in the finance world. I had bought their company, not all of it, but enough to call the shots, enough to force the board's hand against my father, and enough to essentially sign my father's retirement papers and save the company from his desperate attempts to keep his sinking schemes afloat. I hadn't just not had a breakdown. I had initiated a corporate takeover. The shock was absolute. My mother started trembling. No, you can't, the money. You don't have the capital," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The art is just a hobby." I smiled again, a cold, empty smile. "The art is currently doing quite well, Mother. And as for capital, my primary angel investor was more than happy to back a fresh, ethical perspective to stabilize the family name. Funny how that works, isn't it? I saved your company from ruin, Father." My father, his face now a mask of pure, wounded pride, crumpled the documents in his hand. You conniving little snake. You used our name, our connections. You taught me how to find leverage, Father. I countered, my voice steady. And you gave me all the motivation I needed. You planned to humiliate me and leave me destitute. I simply ensured that I would never be in a position to need a single penny from you ever again. And in the process, I secured the family's actual legacy from your mismanagement. Your disownment letter is, quite frankly, moot. I own your future now, not the other way around. I then looked directly at Chloe, whose phone was still recording. And you, Chloe, I'm sure you were planning to use that footage to laugh with your friends. But instead, you've captured the exact moment your little sister became the only person standing between you and complete financial ruin. She immediately lowered the phone, the red light vanishing. The golden child was terrified. The script was completely rewritten. I wasn't the victim anymore. They were the ones who had just received the news of their impending professional and financial collapse. The rest of the conversation was short and sharp. I told them that the only reason I hadn't completely liquidated everything was for the sake of the few honest employees, and I admitted, for the preservation of the family name, which, despite everything, was still important to me. I informed them that they had 48 hours to vacate the family estate, as the sale to my holding company was finalizing, meaning the home would be leased back under my ownership. I had purchased the debt on the house months ago, which allowed me to swoop in when the foreclosure was triggered. I offered my father a generous, non-negotiable severance package in exchange for signing an airtight non-disclosure agreement regarding his retirement and the true reason for the company transition. He took it. He had no choice. I stood up, adjusting my jacket. They were silent, stunned, their grand public humiliation of me having backfired into their catastrophic private ruin. I looked at the disownment letter still sitting on the table. You wanted to cut me off, and you did. I accept it, I said, picking up my purse. But you neglected to realize that when you cut me off, you also cut off the last person in the world who was actually willing to save you. I walked out of that restaurant and into the street, feeling lighter than I had in my entire life. I didn't get my expected breakdown. I got my freedom, my company, and the kind of vindication that money can't buy. The aftermath was swift. My father retired, blaming his sudden health issues on the stress of the business. My mother retreated completely from the social scene. Chloe's wedding was postponed, mostly because her fiancé, who was looking for an advantageous merger with the Sterling family money, quickly dropped her once he realized the money now belonged to me, the artist. I made sure to clean up the company, replacing the old, corrupt board members and installing a new, ethical leadership team. I never went back to the old mansion. I sold it, using the profits to establish a foundation for young, independent artists. A final, poetic middle finger to my parents' view of art as a frivolous pursuit. It's been 2 years. I've heard nothing from them, and that silence is the greatest gift they could have ever given me. I am finally free. If you stood by my side during this whole crazy story, please like this video. It was a brutal choice, but I wouldn't change a thing. Subscribe for more stories like this, where the quiet one finally gets to speak the loudest. And share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far, or did they get exactly what they deserved? I'll see you all in the next story.